Well, Mr. Secretary, very good to see you again. You're still a terrific witness, my favorite witness ever.
Thank you.
I would, first of all, like to know how many cars it took to get all you guys over here. I mean, it's a big group. Let me just read back to you what you said 20 years ago, Mr. Secretary, that simply standing in a defensive position, absorbing blows is not enough, that terrorism must be deterred. And I say with great respect, it seems to me, up to the 11th September, we were standing in a defensive position, taking blows. I mean, I'm going to give you the same line that I gave former Secretary Cohen when he was here earlier. I mean,
and I'm going to give you the same answers. I thought he did a good job.
All right. Well, we'll see if they're the same answer. I mean, it wasn't just that we were attacked on the 11th September, Mr. Secretary. It's the same group of people that hit the Cole on the 12th of October. Same group of people that tried to hit the Sullivans a few months before that. The same group of people that were responsible for millennium attacks against the United States that we had interrupted, and in Jordan. The same group of people that hit our East African embassy bombings on the 7th of August. And we now believe the same group of people are responsible for other attacks against the United States. This was an army led by Osama bin Laden who declared war on us on the 23rd of February, 1998. And we had all kinds of reasons, I've heard them all, and they're all wonderful, as to why the only military attack we had was a single attack on the 20th of August, 1998, and other than that, there wasn't anything. And 19 men, as a consequence, defeated us utterly with less than $500,000. And I ask you, wouldn't a declaration of war, either by President Clinton or President Bush prior to this, not just to go after bin Laden, but to say the DOD, the CIA, and other agencies, you got to work together. You got to put together a terrorist list of radical Islamists that we believe are connected to these things and prevent them from coming in the United States of America. You got to make sure you consider all options and possibilities that might be used against us. You said you received no specific intelligence about the possibility of a plane being used as a bomb. But Mr. Secretary, you're well known as somebody who thinks about all kinds of terrible possibilities that might happen that nobody else is thinking about. I mean, that's what you do so well when you're going into a difficult situation. I mean, it seems to me that a declaration of war, either by President Clinton or by President Bush, prior to 9/11, would have mobilized the government in ways that at least would have reduced substantially the possibility that 9/11 would have happened. Do you agree or not? That's a different question than I gave Secretary Cohen. I'm getting better at this.
It is. I was going to use his answer, and now I can't. Possibly. Let me put it that way. The problem with it sounds good the way you said it. I try to put myself in other people's shoes, and try to put yourself in the shoes of the new administration that had just arrived. And time had passed. We were in the process of bringing people on board, and the president said he wanted a new policy for counterterrorism. Making a declaration of war in February or March or April, for the sake of argument, without having fashioned the policy to follow it up, which they were working on, without having taken the kinds of steps in the Department of Defense to review contingency plans and get them up to date, to get the assumptions current for the 21st century, without having tried to strengthen the special operations forces, it seems to me might have been a bold stroke that would have sounded good, but when not followed up with the kind of capabilities that we were able to follow it up with on October 7th, when we put forces and capabilities into Afghanistan, so it might not have been a great idea. I don't think it would have stopped September 11th.
Well, let me put it this way to you. Let's say that the Federal Aviation Administration had heeded some warnings about the possibility of a hijacking and had altered the procedures in American airports to prevented these hijackers from being able to get onto the planes in the first place, or had different procedures on the airplanes on the morning of the 11th September to make certain that the pilots were locked up front and that the passengers didn't remain in their seats and cooperate. Let's say, please, let's say that 9/11 hadn't happened. would you have gone to the American people and carried out the strategy that you say you worked on all year long and you came up with on the 4th of September? Because the President had to go to the American people and said, we're going to work to eliminate the al-Qaeda network. We're going to use all elements of national power to do so, diplomatic, military, economic, intel, information, law enforcement, and we're going to eliminate sanctuaries for al-Qaeda and related terrorist networks, and if diplomatic efforts fail to do so, we're going to consider additional measures. Now, earlier in your testimony, you said all the reasons why to do such a thing would provoke angry response. Would the administration have put this policy in place were it not for 9/11?
I believe we would have. One can't announce that for certainty because 9/11 happened, but it had been worked on, developed, and was ready to go into place.
Well, then doesn't
in June and July, when the intelligence spike took place, there were a good number of steps that were taken. My responsibilities, as you know, were overseas, not domestically. But forces were alerted, embassies were alerted, as Secretary Powell indicated today. There were a number of steps taken by the Transportation Department with respect to airlines and cautions and warnings there. So it's not as though the intelligence that was gathering had not been understood and addressed, and a great number of steps in addition to the development of the policy.
Well, I got to say, Mr. Secretary, if that's the case, and I trust you, I believe you on this point, then I don't think it's a good argument to say that the American people wouldn't have accepted something prior to 9/11 that was unpopular. Because you just said that absent 9/11, you would have recommended the President to put in place a policy that would have been exceptionally unpopular and difficult to sell. I believe he should have, by the way, regardless of whether or not 9/11 happened. But it doesn't work. The argument falls on its face if you say, please understand we couldn't have done this before 9/11, if you say you would have done it absent 9/11.
I understand.
All right. Let me say, Dr. Rice has said that the national security team was briefed on the threat of al-Qaeda and transition, and that it was well understood. This is what she said in the Washington Post yesterday. It was well understood by the President and his national security team, the principals. In the interview that we did with you, you seemed not to be as clear as Dr. Rice was, or at least Secretary Powell was. And by the way, I'm very sympathetic to that, given that the Department of Defense did not have that kind of authority over counterterrorism activities. So perhaps that would be the reason you were not. But in the interview, you indicated that you didn't recall that briefing. And in your testimony, you also referenced, and I'd love to hear that even you have moments that you forget. You were at a briefing and people were telling you something. Do you recall the briefings on al-Qaeda by Secretary Cohen? And
Secretary Cohen commented on it today. We did have one or two meetings. He had a long list of items. There must have been 40 or 50 plus items. I have given it to the committee. The first item was one that concerned him the most, and it involved a sensitive item that was very much on his mind, that was terrorism related, but to my recollection, not al-Qaeda related.
It seems to me that Dr. Rice is overstating the case a bit in that statement, saying that the threat of al-Qaeda was well understood by the President and his entire national security team.
I don't think that's an overstatement. I mean, certainly the people in the administration who came in didn't arrive out of cellophane packages.
But you didn't get a briefing by the Counterterrorism Security Group, nor by SOLEC?
I did not get a briefing that Secretary Powell got, no. I was briefed by members of the Joint Staff and other people in the policy departments of the Department of Defense.
Dr. Rice also said that she wasn't satisfied with the off-the-shelf military response options that were available after the Cole, the so-called tit-for-tat options that I think she was referring to 20 August 1998 against the camps in Afghanistan. Did she ask for military options? Or were there military options requested during your term? Because our investigation shows that there were no new military plans developed against al-Qaeda or bin Laden prior to September 11th.
I think it's accurate to say, General Myers, you may want to chime in here, but I think it's accurate to say that there were military options, and I characterize it as options and not a comprehensive plan to deal with al-Qaeda and countries that harbor al-Qaeda, but options to react, response options, military response options, to deal with specific terrorist events. And I was briefed on them, as I indicated in my testimony, and I suspect that Dr. Rice was briefed on them. I can just say that I don't remember ever seeing, in the first instance, I don't remember anyone being briefed on military proposals to react to something where they were fully satisfied, nor do I ever remember military people being fully satisfied with the intelligence available. That's the nature of the world we live in. Dick, do you want to comment?
Well, I would just add that we did, after the cold, continue some of the planning that had gone on before, since '98, actually, and developed some additional options. I think we briefed the committee on those, or at least the staff.
That's why I was a little confused when the National Security Advisor in the Post says that we didn't have an al-Qaeda plan. No plan was given to the new administration on how to deal with al-Qaeda. And then she goes on to say that was not satisfied with the off-the-shelf options that were available. And especially in the second case, we don't see any evidence that during the Bush administration there were any new requests that came to DOD asking for new military options. If there was dissatisfaction with the National Security Advisor, you would think she would have sent a request over for alternative military options.
First of all, my recollection is that Sandy Berger has agreed with Dr. Rice that a plan for the al-Qaeda was not handed from one administration to the other. And second, my understanding is that the Joint Staff, after I was briefed and asked a lot of questions, went back down and continued working on those response plans throughout that period, and that was one of the reasons why we were in a position to respond so promptly after September 11th. Is that true?
That's correct.
Well, I said it to Secretary Powell earlier, but I would say to you as well, Mr. Secretary, I don't understand this "we're waiting for a plan" thing at all. I really don't. I mean, God, we're dealing with an individual who's led a military effort against the United States for 10 years and has serially killed a significant number of Americans over that period of time. And why in God's name I got to wait 8 months to get a plan? I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the problems that you mentioned. I mean, Paul wasn't on board, I guess, till March, and lots of other. Your last appointment, I think you had in your testimony, wasn't there. Your key appointment wasn't there till August or something like that. I'm very sympathetic to all the difficulties of transition. But it still, I still get in my head, why do we need a brand new military, a full-blown plan like we're building a house or something here?
Well, let me just make one comment, and maybe someone else would like to respond, but Afghanistan was harboring the al-Qaeda. Afghanistan was something like 8,000 miles from the United States. It was surrounded by countries that were not particularly friendly to the United States of America. Afghanistan, as I said publicly on one occasion, didn't have a lot of targets. I mean, you can go from an overhead and attack Afghanistan, and in a very short order, you run out of targets that are lucrative. You can pound the rubble in an al-Qaeda training camp 15 times and not do much damage. They can put tents right back up. It's not like the country has suffered for decades in drought, in civil war, in occupation by the Soviet Union, and trying to deal with them from the air, in my view, and that is essentially what the courses of action were that I saw.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary, but you said earlier that even absent 9/11, your strategy would have been to eliminate the al-Qaeda network, to use all the elements of national power to do so, to eliminate the sanctuaries for al-Qaeda and related terrorist networks. I appreciate that. Is it a tough mission? Yes. But your declaratory earlier was that you'd carry that out even absent 9/11.
And I would say that that's one of the reasons that Secretary Powell and I and others in the department, in the government, spent time connecting with countries in that part of the world in ways that were unusual and distinctly different than had been the case previously from the very first day of the administration.
You're off the hook. My time's up. Off to Senator Gordon.